Tēnā koutou, tēnā tātou, koutou rā e mātakitaki mai nei, ki runga I pukamata I tēnei pāpā o Mataora. O tira ki koutou rā e Whakarongo mai nei, ki runga I tō tātou nei taonga o te maunga, te korimako o Taranaki. Ko Te Aorangi tēnei e mei ka atu ki koutou katoa. Ko te tūmanako kei te Noho haumaru ai tonu koutou ki roto I wā koutou ware nā kei te Noho mo'o au ki roto I wā koutou nei kāinga. Mena kei te mātakitaki mai koutou, kei te kite koutou, ko wai kei taku taa. Nā aira, ko taku I ramatu, a te Wehi tērā. Tēnā koe te Wehi.
Kia ora, Auntie.
Nā reira, ka tuku te rākau ki aia, ki te waka mo'o atu ki koutou katoa. Ko wai ia aua tanga katoa, nā reira te Wehi, kei a koe te wā.
Ho mauri ora kia tātou katoa, kia whai ake I ngā kupu whakamihi, ngā kupu whakamiha tōku whaia, ko te Wehi o Wehi Wright tēnei. He uri tēnei no Taranaki tonu, no te take o tō tātou maunga, no ngā rua hine. Me te aha, ko tērā atu wai oku, e tau ana ki roto o taku taha te arawa. Ko ngā tirangitihi tērā, ko ngā whakaue, ko ngā tuere ko kōpako hoki era. Ka mutu, ara anō aku hononga ki roto I ngā tiraukawa, me ngā tukahunguru ki te wairoa, nā ko te taha o tōku pāpā tērā. No reira ko ngai iwi rau, ko ngai hapū rau, tēnei e mihi atu ana ki a koutou. Koutou e whakarongo mai ana, koutou e mātaki mai ana, atu I o kāinga, e noho haumaru ana, I runga I ngā huatanga o te wā. No reira e mihi ana ki tērā huatanga, ahakoa e noho tawhiti ana, ko te ngākau tonu tēnei e noho tatatonu nei, no reira tēnā koutou.
Ana, tēnā koe te Wehi, o tira kei te mei hoki ki koutou o Tāmaki Makaurau, e noho tonu ana ki te pai haumaru tua, toru o te mate karauna I tēnei wā. Ne? Kei reira tonu rātou, That's still in level 3? Yeah. Kei te mihi ki koutou, taking it for the team of 5 million, e te whānau, and of course, a mihi too, your Auntie Iri, she's keeping us up to date with what life is like in Tāmaki Makaurau. Nā reira e te wehi e mihi ana ki koe, mo te waiwā ki te no o tai ki tātou I tēnei o ngā rā. Yeah, good to have you here, Nā he pai tō poraka hoki. Ia o koutou mai mo te whakanui I te wiki o te reo Māori?
Wow, ke pono te kōrero kāre I tino rereke. Nā te mea, ko tō mātou kāinga, he kāinga kōrero Māori, no reira, actually, and I ohorere taku I tamāhine I te wai mea tau ki ai, waipu a tērā wiki ka whakanui tātou I te reo Māori. Ko tāna hea hai, ko te wiki o te reo Māori, heo engari, kei te kōrero Māori au I nāne, hei, e mua tarawa. Kao, e pērā te whakatupuria o a tātou tamariki I newa, engari ko tāku kia he wā pai tēnei ki te aki I te motu, ki te whakanui I tō tātou reo. Me te mōhua hoki, ana ko tāku kia koetahi o nā ke kuia, o nā ke koroua, ko rātou ngā mea I pikau I nā rātou te mānuka e hiki, e riro tātou, tēnei rangi, tēnei wiki, engari te āheinga ki te whakawhitiwhiti I te reo Māori, ki te reo Māori, mo te reo Māori, ahakoa te rā, ahakoa te wiki, no reira, no reira, kia whai te rā, e hara I te mea I tino rereke ngā mahi, atu pēr I te kaha ke atu o taku aki I aku hoa mahi, ki te kōrero Māori, te kaha aki I aku hoa, ki te kōrero Māori, āpiti atu ki tērā I taku wāhi mahi I kuhu hoki mātou ki tērā Māori language moment, o tērā te whakataere. Waitahi I tō tātou wai, I tō mātou waiata, te waiata o te mahi, nā I whakairihia ki pai āhua ki runga I a pukamata ahahara nei engari. Me te aha, ko te te atu whāinga hoki, o ko tētahi atu whāinga I whakarite e mātou. o te kāinga, I te mea kei te ako taku hoa, te reo Māori. No reira, kōwhea ki atu pia te wiki ki te tino whakau I etahi o ngā ahuatanga, no reira I ahakoa ko roa mau e pēne ana I tēnei marama tonu, me te wiki ko pahure, I ki taurangi atu māua kia māua ka ngana kia reo Māori anake mo te roanga o te rā wiki, taihoa pia mo te roanga o te marama, a kene pia ko te roanga o tō māua oranga. So, ana, I pai. Engari, I te mutunga o te wiki I whakairi au I te teimea ki runga I taku Instagram I te mea o tēnā koutou whakanui tō tātou reo. Engari, mo etahi o mātou. He wiki kotahi noa tēnei o ngā wiki 52. So, ko te tumanako ka ki te tonu I a koutou a tērā wiki.
Tikatau. I pātau mai tētahi ki au hoki. He hao mahi mo te wiki Māori, ka pērā tonu. Haere ngā tamariki ki te kura, he parakitihi ka pahaka ia ahi, aua āhuatanga katoa, kaore he rereke me ki. Engari, me ngana tonu au ki te kōrero Māori I te nuinga o te wā. Yeah. He ua tonu tērā mōku. Ki te ki te reo Māori I ngā wā katoa. Engari, kua rongo au, Kua whakarongo au ki ngā kōrero I pita mai I taua wiki. Me ngā whakaaro o te nuinga e pā ana ki taua kaupapa, te waiata anthems. Nā ko tētahi o ngā kōrero, kua mau I ahau ko te use it or lose it me ki. Ko kāre au I tino whakai ki ngā whakaaro etahi atu, ko tērā tētahi whakaaro ka tau mai ki roto I ahau. Just use it or lose it. Ahakoa te iti, te rahi o tō reo Māori o kupu, mena ka he kei te pai tērā, just gotta learn from that. Engari, kokiri tonu I te waka o te reo Māori, so yeah, no, pai tērā ki au, te whakawhiti kōrero.
Yeah, well, actually, pai tērā kaupapa kōrero, because kua tino, e hare te mea kua panonihia o ku whakaaro, engari, kua huri rānei, engari ki te hoki au I era kōrero. Ana I pauri, I think I pauri au. I pauri au I te mea moku ake, I te mutunga iho, e hara I te mea ko Māori, ki tāku ki tēnei, ahakoa te taha e noho nei koe, ai te mutunga iho ko Māori e kai ana I a Māori when moku ake, we've lost sight of the true enemy, I roto e nea huatanga katoa. Ana, koera noa tāku, kei wareware tātou.
Koea.
Ko tahi tonu te hua I te āhuatanga I pēnei ai tātou. Kaua ko te hunga e kōrero Māori ana, kaua ko te hunga kāre e kōrero Māori ana. Ko te hunga nā rātau e nei āhuatanga e nei whakaaro I pēhitia ki notia ki runga I a tātou. So, I te tōnga o te rā ki tērā kaupapa, ki tērā wiki, whakawhiti kōrero mā ko te ana me tāku o me kaha ake au. Kaha ake taku aki I te Māori. Ahakoa ki hea koe noho ana. Ahakoa te kaha rānei o tō reo. We just got to keep reminding ourselves the very nature of those arguments, regardless of the camp that you're in, is divisive. And it is divisive by design. And all it does is pips us against each other when actually the real enemy is above us. Nee.
Hey, and just we because you and I and Tamsin actually we've had a big kōrero before. Like I think it went for over an hour on the station when you came in and sat with us. You gave us a brief he paku kōrero e pāna ki tō tipuranga ki roto I te reo Māori me te mahi o mātua, and actually your parents really influencing our whānau, our own whānau for sure. And we understand our responsibilities and all of that. And if it wasn't for them too, really, if it wasn't for them and others in their reanga within the Raureti whānau, I don't think we'd be here right now. And then we spoke about it just before we came on about whether we would talk about the article that you wrote. And now I think, ka kōrero tāua mō taua kaupapa. So you wrote an article a couple of years back now, and that popped up again during Te Wiki o Te Reo Māori. And yeah, let's talk about that. Ka hao whakaro i tua i tuhi koe i taua tuhingaroa?
Yeah, it was interesting actually. So yeah, that was maybe 3 or 4 years ago. And I think it was timely, given the nature of the discussions that were happening at the moment. Ko te kaupapa o tērā tuhinga i tonoa mai e tētahi waku hoa. Kia tuhi au i tētahi rerenga o tētahi tuhinga pia. And to give my thoughts on the survival, on whether or not I thought the Māori language would survive. And as I always do, I just reflected on my own upbringing. And I think the article itself was more me trying to, not because I believe that Te Reo Māori, the Māori language will survive. And that's not because I can see the future, but that's because I know the level of commitment that our whānau will have given and will continue to give to Te Reo Māori. And that's not a commitment just so that everyone speaks Te Reo Māori. That's actually a commitment so that our children keep speaking Te Reo Māori. And so when I was asked that question, it would be silly of me to say that I don't think it would survive, because then I'm going, that essentially what I thought is, if I didn't believe that, then I'm accepting that at some point down my whakapapa line, the speaking of Te Reo Māori or knowing Te Reo Māori, or, just Te Reo Māori in our whakapapa line was going to stop. And so that was really the premise of my discussion. I don't think Te Reo Māori will die out. I think Te Reo Māori will continue to survive, because within our own whānau, we will ensure that we keep speaking it to our children. And it was really used as a motivation, because it's not saying that the survival of the Māori language is dependent on our whānau, but it's actually encouraging you that if we keep speaking Te Reo Māori to our children, then it won't die out. And if you can't speak Te Reo Māori, then after you learn, if you learn, then we need to make sure that we try and keep sharing that. So, it was interesting because I was given the chance to write it in Māori or write it in English, and if I was to write it in Māori, I was probably only going to be speaking to the converted or preaching to the converted. And so I deliberately wrote it in English because, for 2 reasons. One, I wanted people to get an insight into our upbringing. And 2, I wanted people to understand that there are still whānau or communities within Te Ao Māori that are as hard out as our whānau are. But the most important part was understanding why we're that hard out. And I think the reason and the why is the most important to me, because the why is essentially the thing that was coming up again last week, where we hear kōrero about kura kids being elitists purely by virtue of our upbringing, because we're fed Te Reo Māori. We didn't have a choice, I didn't grow up choosing Te Reo Māori. I grew up speaking Te Reo Māori. But I grew up speaking Te Reo Māori because our parents, who had no choice but to speak English, decided that they wanted something better for their kids. And so going back to the last kōrero that I had on this kaupapa, ultimately it was about paying forward that same dream and that same vision. And every time I get up and speak, every time I get up and coho or write anything, my starting point is always making people understand that it's a generational difference. And I'm not saying generation as in just the next generation, but it's generational as in it's the generation after the reclaimers, right? So that's why I thought a lot of the arguments that maybe we saw and the different thoughts or the different schools of thought, particularly around those particular kaupapa, were generational generational in the sense that some people represented the generation that had te reo Māori whipped out of them. Some people represented the generation that they weren't the subjects of the physical abuse, but they were the second generation of language trauma and intergenerational transmission of trauma. And then there are generations of people that are just starting the te reo Māori, and then there are also generations of people that are second generation speakers of te reo Māori because their parents reclaimed. So I think that's where we were. And my stance on all of that too, I know I'm jumping back to that other kaupapa, but my stance on all of that was, you know, ko tō piki amokura nō, ko tōku piki amokura nōku. You know, your truth is your truth and my truth is my truth. And I'm not disputing that. If that's how you feel, yeah, no, e tika ana. But then for me, it's once we actually start losing sight of not really who to blame, but losing sight of actually what the end goal is, which is ultimately a better future for our kids. That's when you get a little bit concerning. And I think the article for me was trying to make sure that people can see that, you know, there is still an opportunity for those types of things to happen. So yeah, I think that was really it.
Yeah, I thought it was a very, or as you always are, very balanced in your thoughts and thoughtful of everybody, but for a reason right now, also because your rangatira, I will say, tō wahine, no, she's not tō wahine, he wahine ia, but she's on that road, right now. She is on that road to being a reclaimer, and we were speaking about this earlier too. If your mokopuna were to listen to this interview in 50 years' time, they may never have known that actually their nana, Meki, at that, you know, in 50 years' time, they may never have realised or known that their nana didn't speak te reo Māori. And so I think this is what it's about, right? It's never the wrong time to learn. And why do it? If you can't do it for yourself, do it for your children. Really? Right? I mean, e hari te mea kei te whakaaro noa mō ake. We're thinking generations ahead.
Yeah, and I think, I don't know, it is funny. So, and I'm lucky in actually within our own whare, actually within our whānau, but within my own household, you've got a really strong representation of the journey itself, right? From the beginning to the middle with our kids and I'm not saying I'm at the end of the journey, but I think because of the upbringing that we've had, we're probably closer to that end of the spectrum as opposed to the middle or the beginning. And I hear it, you know, we hear, and I'm lucky enough to witness some of, I think I mentioned, like some of the greatest lessons I've learned about te reo Māori, I've learned from Te Ana in her journey of learning how to speak Māori. So funny. So that week I was asked to speak on a kaupapa for one of our Māori students associations, and apartheid came from the students, and I think I'm fortunate that I'm able to experience things vicariously through the people that I hold close in my circle. And so the apartheid that came to me was, what are my words of encouragement or support to those Māori that are learning, but sometimes feel a little bit whakamā or disrespected somewhat because there are non-Māori within their class that speak it freely. You know, anō nei pai ki atu te reo Māori o te Pākehā ki tērā o te tangata Māori e ako ana i tōna ake reo. And I think, and it's not funny at all, but the most interesting part to that is after that call, that very night, Tiana was in the room and she was crying for that same reason. You know, I'm just not getting it. And I hope she doesn't mind me saying this, but well, she's right there, so I can see her. So she's on. But like, you know what I mean? And so I've learned heaps. One, how to kind of manage my own responses, because I am privileged in the sense that I have been brought up totally in te reo Māori, and so I've never experienced that level of language trauma, right? And we talk about language trauma, and I agree. and through Te Anau, I believe that it's a thing. And so in that instance, it's me first appreciating that, one, I do have a position of privilege, and so it's not me asking or answering that question from my position of privilege, but it's actually also not knowing and identifying and leveraging of my partner, who's able to give me insight that's actually allowed me to expand my own perspectives on Te Reo Māori. And so I'm lucky enough, because of her, to see a wider perspective on these things than I would have ordinarily got. And I think that's important. I think that is the most important thing for anybody that's at whatever end of the language journey, is knowing that it doesn't matter how wide you can see when it comes to Te Reo Māori, or even learning or reclaiming your culture. It's far wider than you could ever imagine. And so that's probably been one of the most interesting things, I think, in my journey, because it's knowing that now, so my journey has never been my own journey. My journey has been my parents' journey. But now my journey is not my own journey. My journey is my children's journey, and it's my partner's journey. So now it's not giving a balance in opinion. It's knowing that all of those opinions, whether I agree with them or not, are valid in the context in which they sit.
Yeah.
And it's our job, I guess, as the ones that are lucky enough to be brought up that way, to hold space when we can. But at the same time, and this is probably the more progressive in me, I'm not going to stop trying to push and keep progressing the status of the language. But I am going to make sure that the more forward we go, the more people that we take with us.
Yeah, I guess my conversations with Sarah, and she won't mind me saying this, she's actually not in the room, so she can listen to this when this plays on the radio, actually. Her conversations have been the same. You're in a class, you finally got yourself to a place where you can commit and invest time into learning your own language, and then you're all of a sudden a minority in some sense, in your own reo, learning your own reo in your own classroom. You're still a minority. Just hearing some of those kōrero that have come from many different people. And I can remember one time, and I was in a reo class, and there was a teacher from one of the local mainstream primary schools, Pākehā lady, who, she'd worked so hard to remember this whole kōrero that we had to give, but she didn't realise we'd all worked that hard. Like her thought was that, well, you're Māori, so of course you're going to get it. And our thing was like, well, nah, actually, we're probably on the same level here, but we just have to think about the other responsibilities that come with it. I mean, this could go on forever. There's lots of reasons why people felt the way they did, but
no, I think
I can jump out of a thing pretty quick.
No, well, this is what I say to Tiana. Like, in terms of that dilemma or that dynamic, it is quite easy for non-Māori, because they don't carry and it's not a burden, but they don't carry the cultural obligation or the cultural pressure to have to know the language. Tuatahi. Tuarua, they haven't been subject to cultural oppression for 181 years. These were deliberate acts so that Tiana ended up the way that she did. Right? These were coordinated, strategic, from the Native Schools Act to pepper potting to, dispossessing Māori of their land. These were targeted acts to ensure that Māori grew up not speaking, not appreciating, and not understanding themselves, their language, and their culture. And so I think what I say to Tiana, you can't expect to unpack 181 years of deliberate acts of oppression in a matter of a year, Yeah. And then it's saying that the other thing, and I was trying to say, is people go to those courses. Te Reo Māori is the focus, but they're really only looking at it in the lifespan of that particular course. Whereas for us, learning Te Reo Māori, like going back to what I was saying about the journey, it's timeless. Because when you learn Te Reo Māori, or when you teach your when your children speak Te Reo Māori or when your grandchildren speak Te Reo Māori, that's still your language journey. And if you can sit back and look at your children, and even though you can't speak Māori, but you can see your grandchildren or your great-grandchildren were brought up as first language speakers, that's your language journey. And you need to be proud of that. And so, thinking about koro, nana, and even my dad, on my dad's side, who rightly or wrongly agreed or didn't agree, and I'm talking about dad's parents, with the way in which we were being brought up, only in Te Reo Māori, we're still part of their language journey. And I think that we often lose sight of that when we're caught in the heat of the moment. And I'm obviously speaking from a which I can see the irony in all of it, but Tiana and I wānanga this stuff all the time. And so, and I think we just need to keep checking ourselves, keep refining. I'm going to be honest, and I'm not a big fan of Lorde, but in terms of her singing the Māori, I probably didn't have the same allergic reaction as anybody else did. And the reason for that is when we were being brought up, mum and dad were a bit hard out. We're only allowed to listen to Māori songs, right? Selection was limited. It was limited. Engari, inane, iau e whakatupu ana yaku tamariki, ki te reo Māori, Noho. I had a bit of a moment, I had a bit of a cry because I was reflecting on our own upbringing and how resources were scarce, how we couldn't really watch TV because it was only in Māori, how we couldn't really listen to music because the music we were listening to had to be in Māori. And so when I think about my kids have a whole range of TV shows that they can watch now because we choose to raise them like that, which is, I think, that's a stance of mana motuhake in itself. And now when they decide to listen to music, they've got a whole range of songs, a whole range of artists. Their heroes or their idols don't have to be Kimo Winiata anymore.
Oh, what's wrong with that? Nah.
No, it's not.
No, well, I mean, for me personally, her singing in Te Reo Māori wasn't the issue for me. I mean, to be honest, the first Waiata Anthem project that came out, my most favourite song out of that came from Benny. I actually didn't even know it was Benny. I thought her name was Benet. So this whole time I'd been listening to it, and she had put out her song, and because I didn't even know who she was, I thought her pronunciation was great and all of that. So that Lorde was singing in Te Reo Māori, it didn't bother me. The reaction, though, of those who did feel like, oh my gosh, this is whatever they felt. They had their reasons, and it's their reality. And what I didn't get, I truly didn't understand, was the reaction from the people who were part of the project, because no one was actually going on about the mahi that was done. Those songs should be amazing, and they are. The kupu and the translations, I don't even think you can call them translations. The mahi that came out of those projects, honest, that was mean as. What I didn't like was like being told that if you didn't agree with it, then what are you doing for Te Reo Māori? Those sorts of things. When it's like, well, actually, I think I'm doing my bit. I do think I'm doing my bit. Could I be doing better? Yes, definitely. I mean, I can remember taking to Mihiata. We were going on a car ride with Alana Watson. Put in the only CD that the kids ever listened to in the car. I've got useless at it now. Was the Te Reo Taranaki Waiata. So Mihiata, she's jamming in the back to her picking up popo. That was, and even back then, there wasn't as wide a range as there is now, but I was okay with her only knowing those songs, so it wasn't that Lorde was, for me anyway, it wasn't that she was singing in Te Reo Māori. That wasn't it. I'd never ever, and I'm staunch to this, would expect for a non-Māori to get propped up over our own people. Never going to be done for that. And I'm unapologetic about that too, because, you know, it's not even just about te reo Māori. The things that we're working in against at the moment, and I can only speak about it from a Taranaki point of view because that's where I'm living, in regards to whenua, kaitiakitanga, our waterways and stuff like that. And here's an example. Here's an example of us really trying to push for clean waterways within one of our hapu rohe at the moment, and we are being used against each other. You know, I just don't like that, whether it's with te reo Māori or not. So I guess that was part of a reaction as well. The term elitism, we're all elite. If you're Māori, you're elite because you got whakapapa Māori. That puts us, you know, that puts us in another dimension, I think. So that term elite is nothing, but there's definite privilege. I'm privileged. You're privileged because, well, I guess people would think you're privileged because you come from a space of being brought up in te reo Māori. I'm privileged because of the access that I have to te reo Māori. But the elite thing, I don't agree with anybody, any of us feeling like having te reo Māori is a form of elitism. I think that's a real Pākehā construct to label our people like that and think that we are elevating ourselves above others. We just can't help it. We're Māori. It is what it is, man. We can't help that.
Yeah, well, and see that was my my thing. So, and I think that's probably what I got. Kōrero Podio. It wasn't because as far as whatever camp people sat in, yeah, that was fine. That was fine with me. But it was once we started engaging in each other's camps and, you know, and telling each other that our respective camps were wrong. Oh, you know, that on both ends, koira, that's what I didn't like. Because ultimately it just helps one particular group of people do what they've been wanting to do for 181 years easier. And that's really what it was for me. And like I said, I'm never going to stop trying to progress te reo Māori and put it in whatever and anywhere for my kids. But at the same time, and because of the lessons that I've learned and been lucky enough to learn from watching and witnessing Tiana's growth in that space, knowing that actually there's a whole range of work that still needs to be done behind us as well as in front of us. And I think that really, you know, when I think about it, when I see Tiana, I almost can see the journey that mum and dad took, you know, and that's strength, you know, that's but yeah, I think in terms of what I didn't like about that whole situation and this isn't the only example for it, is the fact that we ended up taking it out on each other when actually the person that we should be taking it out on, well, you know, that's a political discussion.
Yeah, well, I mean, who do you take it out on? It's hurt. It's you know, it comes from a place of hurt for many people, and rightly so. I mean, none of us can, like you're saying, exactly what you're saying. People's reality is people's reality. It's their own lived experience, right? And so you can't really discredit that lived experience. Anyway, we're going just a little bit off topic, but not really off topic because he pai te whakawhiti kōrero. So now this is going to be a bit of a jump, but that's okay, te whānau. So Te Wehi was talking about his whakapapa earlier on, and obviously there's ties into Ngāti Raukawa. And because we are a big sporting whānau, and for those of you who have been watching regularly, you'll know I love talking about sport. Like it's as much as we love te reo Māori, we love sport. Like actually, my brother, sport comes first out of everything. So Te Wehi, he's managed to, actually the only thing you haven't done is leave for Ngā Ruahine yet. Don't worry, that's coming up. But you've played Taranaki Tūmai. You'll be registering for Ngā Ruahine. Watch that whare hoka wano. He always tries to poach the bloomin' Wright boys to play for either Te Atiawa or Taranaki Iwi. But no. You'll be playing for us. But that's where I want to head, is to your sports journey. Because you're talked to Caps a couple of weeks ago, him and his wahine, and they said, oh yeah, your nephew, he plays for Ngāti Raukawa for league. And so, yeah, and you play for Ngāti Porou for rugby too. What's that like? I reckon it's cool, man. I love watching your sports journeys because you've always been quite a focused kid. For example, whānau, Te Wehi never had odd socks as a kid, and they were always pulled up. Always. There were problems if there was odd socks in the whare, so he's a rituals type of guy.
Look good, feel good. Oh, look good, feel good, play good. Even when I was 6.
It all matters. So tell us a bit about that, your journey with sport. It
started with the separation of Rangi and Papa, and so, and I think similar as we were just raised speaking Māori, we were also just raised with a hockey stick in our hands. And, I just remember, I don't ever remember the first time I went to the turf. I just always remembered being at the hockey turf when we were young, because Mum was so engaged in coaching back then and coaching and playing. And I think, so our love for sports probably just came from, it was always part of our life. Our life consisted of kaupapa, consisted of te reo Māori, and consisted of hockey. And that was just how it went. And as we got older, and the more we played hockey, and then the more we kind of displayed, most of us, maybe not all of my siblings and I, but most of us displayed a certain prowess or skill level or affinity to that particular sport, then we would start taking a more of a developmental pathway to honing and developing those skills. But I love sport. I love sport because it was what my friends were doing. And if my friends were going somewhere, then I would go there. And then added to that was I always got a sense of like a feeling of exhilaration, running. And I was lucky. I was little. I've always been little. And with that, I've always been lucky enough to be quite quick or quite nippy. And so, although growing up playing hockey, and although I'll get to rugby, that probably gave me, that was my first introduction to sport. And I realized that I loved it. I loved that. And I don't know why, but it just was something that I just enjoyed doing, whether it was for the social component or for the competitive component. And then as I got older, I moved from hockey to league first, actually, to touch, hockey to touch. And then I was introduced to the oval ball. And then from touch, I made friends who were playing league for Ngāti Pikia. And then so when I was about 15, oh, no, actually, I lie. So when we were about 8, we moved to Coromandel. And when we were living in Coromandel, we went to Te Kūrero Māori o Harataonga. 1 year, we went on a school trip to Ahuahu. And by this time, I still thought I was going to be a black stick. Anyway, while we were in Ahuahu, we were going diving. So we were going with the dads and we were going diving. Anyway, we had to jump over a fence and walk through a paddock. And in these paddock, so Ahuahu is Great Mercury Island or Great Mercury. I don't know what the Ingoa Pākehā of Ahuahu is. Anyway, Ahuahu was one of the stops that, one of the places that Pākehā stopped at on his way to Aotearoa. And so we were at Ahuahu, we're going diving, we had to cross a paddock. Now, the paddock itself felt like a kilometre long. I think it was 20 metres, but it felt like a kilometre because I was a little bit behind. My mates and their dads had already got to the other side of the fence and they were waiting for me. In that paddock were these cows, and they're like the biggest cows that maybe it was because I was little, but I feel like if I was an adult, they were like taller than me. Jumped over the fence, and I was walking in my gumboots. And then I started seeing these cows and these bulls. I think there was a bull getting closer and closer, and then started getting a bit of a gallop. And I took off. I just thought, bloody hell, they're coming to get me. Anyway, sprinted all the way to the other end of the fence, jumped the fence, and the first thing that my friend's dad said was, "Oh, you're quite fast. Do you want to come play rugby?" And that was how it started. So I went to 7th grade, or whatever the grade was, rugby training in Coromandel. And I was koretake because I had never tackled anybody. But going back to what I said, I was little, nippy, fast. And that was my first experience with rugby. But, I don't even know if we tackled back then. Fast forward to when we moved back to Rotorua, I still had an interest in rugby, but because my kura was too small, we couldn't field a rugby team. So I had to go and play league. Anyway, I just went to the Pikiao training one night. I didn't know anybody there, but I packed some of my mates in the car and I said, I'm quite keen. Like, I don't really know, but I know that they train on these nights. So I went there and I just went and said, I want to play league. And they said, have you ever played before? I said, nope. And they said, what have you played? I played like rugby when I was like 8. They said, come and train. And then I ended up playing for the Prems that year. I was 16, something like that. It was cricket. So I played for Pikiao Prems when I was 15 or 16, but mum and dad still thought I was playing for the under-17s. And so what would happen is I would play the first game, I would play for the 17s, I'd play a half for them. And then the next game, if it was a home game, I would play for the Prems. Anyway, I remember asking Dad if he thought it was a good idea that I played Prems, because I was asked to play for the Prems, even though I had played 2 games for them. He said, Carl, no way, Carl, no, mōrere arawa. And so I was like, okay. So I didn't tell Dad that I was still playing for the Prems. One day we were going to Tokoroa, and Dad said, so he thought every time I was going to play league, he thought I was playing for the under-17s. One day he said, kei hea tō kemu. And I said, kei Tokoroa. And because Mum and Dad never watched my games. They never watched my league games, and I thought I was safe because they never came to watch. He asked me that and I said, okay, te tākoro ki a Pacific, or what are the Tokoroa teams? And he goes, yeah, sweet. But I didn't think he knew of it. Anyway, we were warming up with the Prem team, and then we went back into the changing rooms. And then as we were running out to play, at the end of the changing room was Dad, and he saw me running out with all of these men. And I just saw the disappointment in his face, and I was like, oh, no. We got pumped that game. And then I had to jump in the van and go back home with Dad. So that was an experience. But I've loved sport. I think that shows how much I've loved sport. But it's not just about loving sport, but every time I was given an opportunity, I took it. So for half of the year, I was playing league with adults. And so I was learning how to play league from adults. I was learning how to tackle with adults. And so the next year, when I decided to go to Hamilton Boys High to try and play rugby, even though I hadn't played rugby since I was like 6 or 8 or whatever, I was lucky because by this point I had already been playing league against men, even though my parents didn't know. Yeah. And I think it's that, like, I don't know why, but playing sport, and particularly rugby for me, because we're busy whānau. Our wider whānau, very busy. A lot of kaupapa, and a lot of things by virtue of our responsibilities. But for me, rugby has only ever been for myself. It's the only thing I do that has no cultural repercussions or no connection to anything else we do. And so for me, that's been the release, or like the balance that I've been able to get, the opportunity for me to take my mind off things. And I've been real fortunate to get to a relatively high level for sports. And maybe it's because I'm good at it, but I think it's just because I love it. I love competing. I love learning, and I love making sure that I'm getting better. And so for me, if I'm going to do something, I don't just want to do something. I want to be the best at it. And I don't know where that comes from. But in the context of sports, I've never found or done anything else that gives me the same, I guess, satisfaction as that. So when the opportunity came to play for Ngāti Porou East Coast this year, I was real keen, because there was time where I had to take a year off sports fully. I had bad concussions, and I was faced with the realization that maybe I'm going to have to hang the boots up. Obviously didn't listen to that either, like I didn't listen to my dad. But all calculated risks. But so this year's been my first full season back since that. It was quite a bad traumatic injury, and it affected me in more ways, not just physically, but quite psychologically as well. And so, I just grew a greater appreciation, one, for the opportunities that I'm given. Not saying that why waste that by going back to rugby where you could get injured again. But if I ever thought that I was at risk, then I wouldn't do it. But because the body, and if you know my family, then you'll know my siblings and know my parents and know my dad, and I'm not going to be or look like this forever. And so I just thought
you just said that. You're so going to get rolled, man.
Well, I'm not going to be able to compete at a high level as much as I'd like to, for whatever reason, whether it's be through injury or anything else. So, I appreciated the tournament, and I decided to go and play rugby for Ngāti Porou East Coast. This is my second time. The first time I followed one of my best mates over there. He and I played there. And I think, as far as sporting teams are concerned, ai karea no pea kia rongo atu i ngā tima kura me ngā tima Māori ake nei. I guess if you consider this semi-professional or more or less more professional than amateur in the context of amateur sports. Karea no au kia tino rongo i tētahi wairua Māori pēnei i te horopaki Pākehā. I've been lucky. I played for league for our cousins from Ngāti Raukawa, Kirunga, and there's no Māori environment more Māori than that. But in terms of rugby, I've never really felt that same sense in any other team aside from Ngāti Porou East Coast. And so it's been a really, really cool opportunity just to go back. And when you get to the end of your tether, through sporting, it's not really about cracking it or contracts anymore. It's still about being competitive, but it's more about, te whāngai I ngā pukenga me ngā wheako hia e koe ki ngā uri whakatipu. So, I didn't mean that last comment about that. I was just, sometimes we get injured and we can't control the fact that we can't play sport anymore. So I'm just appreciating the fact that I can still play sport.
And you should. Your mum listens to this every morning too. And your dad did this morning as well. And Kirama often gives me a like too. So Te Wehi touched on a good point though. He talks about, being busy outside of just normal everyday life with all the kaupapa. So, he's got a game on this weekend, and of course we're all going to travel to watch it, So I think that's the thing that I love about the sport too, that it's fostered within all of us, is that if anyone's playing something and we can possibly get there, even if it's a 7-hour drive, jokes whānau, we ain't going all the way over to Ngāti Porou country just to watch him play rugby. We will do that. And I wish we had more time, because I'd just love to get into it about what sort of coach Campbell is. I mean, his own quote was, "I am Ngāti Porou rugby." So I just love to know what it's like.
Funny note though, he doesn't even coach us, but funny. So from that last story, from mum and dad not watching, mum still doesn't watch because she doesn't like rugby. But dad watches all the time now.
There you go. This is a bit of a stink one because we are coming to the end of it, and next time I think I'll just put you to the side of the couch and I'll talk with Tiana. So what the heck? What the heck, Tiana? That whole time you were literally one seat away, for goodness sakes. I thought she was like in the kitchen or something, way over. So anyway, what I was going to get at is that you're talking about everything you're doing is for mō ngā uri wakatipu. So even with sport, I mean, yeah, play it for as long as you can. Before you know it, I mean, you already know with Waikohu, your whole whānau's down there watching her play whatever she's playing. Once your kids get into it, it's a whole other life. It's a whole other life. And this is set by example, eh?
Yeah, well, I've committed to being Waikohu's touch coach. Yeah, I'm going to be one of those dads. Nah. But it is, and I already love following her sports. But like I think what I do love is seeing her figure out what it is she wants to do, and if that's not sports, kei te pai tērā. But there've been some moments where like, man, this is really, really cool. And I'd much rather spend my Saturdays doing this than probably playing. So I already know that my days of me playing, or Tauna's days of her playing sports, they're already relatively numbered. But what we're really keen on is our kids seeing us do these things. Like we remember seeing mum and dad play sports. And I was lucky enough to be selected for for the New Zealand University side this year. And Waikohu came,
Yes.
She was with me. And so she was, you can't be what you can't see, whether that's in sports or whether that's in kaupapa, whether that's speaking te reo Māori. You can't be what you can't see, and what you can't hear. So we as parents, we're quite big on doing that for our kids. And I guess the key difference for our kids is that that's still all going to be in te reo Māori.
Tika. Imagine if she wasn't into sports. That would be the strangest thing, actually, considering you're both, mind you, I say that, and my kids not really into sports. Even though Mike wasn't the guy who was playing rugby, he was a keen surfer, hunting all the time. He actually, he was a rugby player until he took up surfing. So, and they have seen me play sport, but Pairo's just getting into it at the age of 13. Wasn't too fussed before that. And Tykes, of course, he'll just do what everyone's doing. He's that guy.
But te kōrero hoki mā ko te ana mo tērā. And I think what we... my kids don't have to get into sports. Kei te pai tērā. I just want them to be able to find that sport equivalent. So for me, sports was it. For me, sports was that thing away from everything else. For Waikohu, it might be singing. For Waikohu, it might be dancing. Kare te moho. But I want to at least try and, we wanted to try and experience, and te hiwa and all of the rest of our tamariki, experience as much as they can when they're young, so they can at least figure that out. Yes, it's not that it has to be sports, but I think it is really important as we get older and as we start committing to particular things that we also still maintain that sense of balance. And for me, it's sports, but for other people, it may not be. As long as we find out what that is, koera te mea nui.
Yeah, tika. Okay, well, ko pou te wā ia tātou, I tēnei wā, te ana. Here she is, our reclaimer of te reo Māori, another reclaimer within our whānau, doing her bit for te reo Māori and for our mokopuna e mihi ana ki koe no mo tō mahi me te whakatipu a mātou nei mokopuna. Poho kereru rawa mātou i a koe, me te tautoko tō tāne ki a koe hoki. Okay, guys, I have to love you and leave you all right now. Nā reira e mihi ana ki kōrua o Taranaki o kinei mokopuna hoki. Ana ka tuku hoki ngā mii ki koutou rā e whakarongo mai nei ki rungi i tēnei o ngā taonga o te maunga tito ia te korimako o Taranaki o Tiraki koutou e mātaki mai i tēnei o ngā pāpā o mata ora, koenei ngā mii nui ki koutou katoa. Nā reira, hei konei, hei kona, tūrau, Hawaii ki.